So thank you everyone for joining. The title of the podcast or the webinar is The Good, Bad and Future of Podcast. I don't know what is the bad part of it, but we're going to talk about the good and the future of the podcast. The one thing is that, podcasts have been around for a while. When I was entering my graduation back in 2006, 2007, I used to hear about podcasts being there. But it's almost taken like 15 years to become mainstream. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but one stat that we had was that in 2018, 64% Americans were familiar with the concept of podcast, which grew to 70% in 2019. Now, today in India, we have a 500 million internet audiences. So how do you think that, how many of Indians are actually aware of the concept of podcast, and how many of these people actually tune into a podcast also? So that's how we're going to start the podcast. But let me just first of all introduce everyone. We have Amit Doshi, founder and CEO of IVM Podcasts. Then we've got Sreeraman Thiagarajan, co-founder and CEO of Agrahyah Technologies and Awas.com. We've got MVS Murthy, head marketing, digital and corporate communication, Tata Asset Management. And we've got Alok Chitre, head of marketing and partnerships from Mahindra Racing.
Hi guys.
So I think before we start, Amit, we'll start from you. If you can just give a small introduction about yourself.
Sure. So I started IVM Podcast in 2015 with the basic thought that, podcasting or talk radio more broadly in India, right, was a very underserved market. And podcasting seemed a good way to kind of attack that market, where you're leapfrogging over the traditional forms of how that content is distributing and moving directly into a digitally distributed piece of content, right? So that was the essential insight at that point in time. Since then, we've launched 105 shows. We do, I think, about 200 episodes a month of content that we create and put out there in the world. Yeah, I mean, you were asking how many people are listening to podcasts right now in India, right? And I think, I think the word podcast is a word which is a very broad word in terms of how people look at it, right? I mean, I've seen some reports from some of the larger consulting companies where they're talking about 50 million people listening to podcasts in India. Yeah. And I find that very difficult to believe, right? And then I heard like a couple of, I heard a couple of jokes about that, right? I mean, which I think are indicative, right? One was that they're including people who listen to Mann Ki Baat as people who are listening to podcasts. The other thing I heard was that somebody at some point transposed lakhs with millions, because this was this was a report where which was talking about data from 2018, and in my estimation in 2018 there were probably around 7 million podcast listeners.
Wow, that's a huge difference. Yeah. Also, one argument we've heard about that 50 million number is that a lot of companies also overlap the audiences between audiobooks and podcasts. Do you think that happens?
I don't think audiobooks are seeing anywhere close to those kinds of numbers. I have some insight into what's going on in that space, and podcasts are bigger than audiobooks by a big margin in India. Audiobooks, the thing with audiobooks is audiobooks has a better revenue model because it's all paid. Yeah. Right. So they have a much stronger revenue model, but at the same time, it's all paid over there.
Got it. Yeah. Sreeraman?
Hey, hi. I'm Sreeraman, co-founder and CEO of Agrahyah and Awas.com. Awas is our podcast platform. It is fully comprising of professionally generated content. It's a platform for other publishers as well. We are in Hindi and English. We have about 600 hours of original programming spanning across 130 shows, 1,300 episodes and counting. So we are present across on the web as Awas.com, on app, and even on a $10 geophone, right? The Kai OS, and to Fire Stick TV, to Ola Play. So we are ubiquitously distributed in that sense. People do listen to us across any medium of their choice, but it's an Awas experience. It's not available anywhere else, right? You have to come to some form of an Awas platform to hear us. We generate about 4.5 million streams or the play a month, and that's going up now. It's almost touching 5 with lockdown. We are seeing some good increase there. In fact, one of the most interesting, at the same time very intriguing insight in the last 2 months is devotional and mythology has gone down below 5 in the top charts, and horror is in top 3. The world looks like a horrible place already, but I do not know why people would listen to more horror show. But yeah, I mean, consumer
That's
behavior is
because the analysis that I shared with you, I'll put that slide on the screen as well. Like we're seeing on video platforms, motivational and all those content actually going up.
Yeah.
And
so motivational is going up. See, I'm just comparing a devotional to a horror, right? So we launched mental wellness with Vyasa. That's one of the mental wellness startup that's renowned, and we launched this relaxing music and things like that. That those are in the top 1 and 2 right now. But somehow horror is, I think, one of those parody account, tweet of God, tweeted something like, no better time to lose faith than now, right?
Yeah.
I don't know whatever the reasons are, but yeah, I mean, that's just a factoid there. Yeah, so the 50 million or 500 million is a very interesting question, because Amit, if we include Mann Ki Baat, a survey indicated 66 crore people or 660 million people have heard Mann Ki Baat, because that comes in 22 languages. It's across, right? So let's discount it. But yeah, 50 million is a very promising number if it was to be true. But we do see a Hindi versus English kind of a difference here, right? The term podcast itself is a very urban English, like the Netflix OTT kind of a scenario. We use the term audio show, and that's the term we stick to for anything that's non-English. So that's the easiest way for us to make people understand what is this all about, right? So that's our take on it.
Alok?
Hi, I'm Alok Chitre. I take care of marketing and partnerships for Mahindra Racing, which is a Formula E team. And
I love your jacket.
Sorry?
I love your jacket, by the way.
Yeah, I thought it'll be a good opportunity to get some sponsor exposure right now, So this is, we've not gone racing since end of Feb now. Of course, all sporting events are closed due to a lockdown. So this is the only opportunity for me to sort of put on my team kit. So yeah, so I take care of marketing and partnerships for Mahindra Racing. We are India's only Formula E team. There are 12 teams in Formula E from all across the globe. All of the large manufacturers participate in it. And for us, we would say that we would be the number one team when it comes to fan engagement as far as digital content online is concerned. And podcasting is something which we started as an experiment within the team last season, wherein we went pure audio, and this season we've gone audio plus video, and we've taken it on YouTube. I'll talk more about it later. But I think it's a interesting format. It's a growing format. Still, there are a lot of gray areas in terms of how one can do more with it. But we've begun our journey. We're seeing some very good traction, especially in terms of long form content. So I'm really looking forward to what we are able to take out of this and what we are able to give all our attendees who've, who are listening to us live right now from their homes all around the world.
Great. MVS, over to you.
Hi, so I'm MVS Murthy and I head marketing for Tata Mutual Fund. I take care of the digital function as well and the digital transformation bit. So for us, podcast was not something that happened, by design. It was by default, because I am pushing this agenda of the 3 Vs, which is voice, video, and vernacular across our company. And this has got a buy-in from the board and the CEO and everyone. So voice was an area that we would have definitely gone out and done stuff. The product that we sell or the service that we go out and sell is something which requires voice by its very nature, because people want to listen about the markets. They want to go out and listen about, what are the funds to go out and invest in. And I think the patience to read long reports or Adobe PDFs is just sort of, drying out. So it's easier to go out and do something like this. And also, as a medium, it allows you to give, quick sound bites to people on a regular basis. We merged the vernacular and the voice bit when we launched Ishq Bhi, Risk Bhi. That was India's first audio drama for investor education. And we just hit gold because it gave us about 100,000 listeners across the country. And as the season 1 came to an end, we also had people who were from the non-Hindi speaking belt who started listening to it. So it's not that it's an experiment for us. It is a conscious choice, and we are building more and more content in the podcast.
I think you are one of the reasons why a lot of our agency partners come to us and say that, do some analysis and tell us how it's worked for the BFSI category.
Yeah, but now you can tell them straight away. Here is the client. He's saying that it's really worked outstanding, and this is and I'm not saying it from the perspective of my role. I think it's been very well received within the sales function. It is very well received by our fund managers. It is very well received by our board. So they appreciate the power of voice, so to say.
MVS, and are you looking at a certain specific audiences that you've kind of identified in this case, which is not available on any other platforms, or it's like more of an engaging platform where you've kind of hit the niche?
Okay, so my constraint becomes my need to search. I am a number 13 ranked mutual fund in the country, and if I were to sort of use the traditional medium or the conventional medium, I will get outsold against the larger players who are there in the market, because it becomes very prohibitive. Therefore, when I want to look at specific audiences, and particularly the T30, as they say, the B30, as they say in mutual fund, which is audiences who are in non-metro kind of locations, there are podcasts works extremely well. Other thing which gives us tailwind is the brand itself. So Tata as a brand is known, across the country and the globe. So when you hear something which is coming from a Tata stable, people like to sort of connect with it. They feel that it is more authentic and they would want to believe it. Of course, they will go and do their due diligence, but it gives us a natural, front foot to sort of look for audiences where we can sort of go and build and grow the market in this case.
Got it. And carrying on that point, Alok, coming to you, how do you see your audiences panning out? Because I think you have a lot of international audiences and like international content out there on your Straight Talk podcast as well. So how do you see kind of connecting with the Indian audiences?
See, for me, traditionally, Nishant, my audience had been very, very India-centric. But over the last 5 years, we have moved from about 90% of our audience being in India to today, more than 50% of our audience being global. So less than 50% of my audience is in India today, then followed by Europe, and then followed by Americas. So I really look at it as sort of a seamless international platform. I'm not looking at any specific geography per se, but for me, interest areas are really critical and crucial. So people who are interested, so I'm in the genre of edutainment. We're trying to educate people about motorsport, at the same time provide some form of entertainment. And these are people who are automotive enthusiasts. These are people who are interested in technology, in understanding about motorsport. So we go wide in terms of geographies and deep in terms of interests and behaviors. So for me, I think it's like any other digital platform. All our digital advertising and all our digital content sort of gets consumed across the globe. So that's exactly how I see podcasts as well, where they work as an extension of my digital content. Today, I mean, less than few single digits, lower single digits is where my time, resources, or my spends are going in podcast. As I said, we just got started with them last year. But we've seen a lot of traction when we moved it onto YouTube. When we moved from a pure play audio where we were present across 5-6 different platforms and started putting it with video on YouTube. And our listeners from a few thousands have now gone into hundreds of thousands. And talking about anywhere between 24-minute to like 47-minuters. And my watch time now is over 500,000 with such a niche category that we are operating it. So it's great. But I still feel we are just scratching the surface with respect to what other content that we do on our other platforms.
Got it. And I think on that point, Sreeraman, I'd like to ask you this question, that we got this one stat that says that less than 30% of the podcasts that are recorded are actually being recorded with video as well. And less than 20% of them are broadcasted probably live somewhere. So do you think that's one space where we might see some growth? Because a lot of these radio shows have started doing a lot of videos which go on social platforms.
Right. So people look at a omnipresent content strategy, right? How can I create content in one place and distribute it everywhere? Just like this webinar could also be on a YouTube and Twitter, and maybe a podcast if you say okay to Paritosh talking to Rahul, right? So the point is we try to increase discovery wherever we can, right? So of course brands do have a choice of distributing it in multiple endpoints, but adding to that stat, Nishant, there is one study it says 52% of all people go to YouTube to listen to something. They're not watching anything.
Yeah.
And if you have seen, that's like, even we all would have done it, right? We keep one YouTube tab open. There's a bunch of Arijit Singh songs, or there is some kind of gym workout. right? YouTube has become a de facto MP3 player now for, or content player now for anything we want, right? Like a child watching 20 rhymes back to back, or an adult playing some gym music and working out. So YouTube is, as much as it's a video platform, people also use it only for audio. So if you are looking at having a podcast and having it distributed on YouTube, of course, please do. It does help in discovery. Uh, yeah.
But you are like right now for you, it's more about the distribution, right? It's across all platforms available where I can go and consume Ava's content. So do
When you
you
say
then,
all platform, you can't find me in a iTunes or a Apple podcast or a Google podcast.
okay, so we're saying only on social platform. So the question there was that for you, is it a platform play? Or right now, would it be more of a content play where you'd produce content and you'd eventually, would you put it on a Spotify or not?
We might, right? That's subject to a lot of licensing arrangements, etc. But we, for us, we are in the business of audience time and attention, right? People come to us because they know they get a particular kind of content they want, and we continuously invest in giving them more of what they want, right? Also, the platform play is in place. We do aggregate content, but it is only from other institutions, publications, newspapers, radio stations, those kind of people. At the moment, we don't have the platform play open to independent content creators, right? So that's it. uh, PGC as a strategy is what we have working out right now. Yeah. So distribution wise, we look at our own endpoints. Ours on web, ours on app, ours on a iOS, ours on a Ola Play, something like that.
Amit, what about you?
So I think that's one of the big differences between how Sriram approaches the space and how we approach the space, right? I think for us, one of the ways that one of the things that I've always kind of been a believer of is that I want to make content available wherever people are listening. So that means partnering with JioSaavn and Ghana and Spotify, making content available as an audio stream on YouTube, besides being in Apple and Google Podcasts and all the rest of it, right? Because I think that we do have our own app, and we are looking at making our app more central to our consumption experience by offering goodies on the app, if you will. Certain features on the app that are not available elsewhere. But having said that, I think that this is my point of view, and I mean, like, I'm obviously one of the few people who maintains this, because everybody else has kind of created the content in their own space, right? But the way I look at it is, I would rather be where people are listening, right? If we have I look at how our consumption occurs right now. We see about 20-25% of our consumption occur over Apple Podcasts. We see about 20% consumption occur over Google Podcasts. So these are two big areas, right? And the thing is that discovery becomes so easy with Apple and Google Podcasts, particularly because there's no installation required of an app, right? And that is a hurdle point, like uh, in the history of our company, right? I mean, like, when I started out, the first, or not the first year, the second year, we did a deal where we worked with Savan, and we were hosting most of our content with Savan exclusively, right? And at that point, what I realized was that the experience that you will get when I promote a podcast in social media or anywhere else, and the experience somebody who does not have someone on their phone has to get to the point to listen to that podcast is terrible, right? Now, what Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts do is that the second you see, hey, you hear about this podcast, Google Podcast built into search functionality of Android phones, so it's right there. Apple Podcast in every iPhone, so it's right there. So for me, I always thought that it makes sense to kind of be where people are. Now that leads to some challenges, right? I mean, like, we don't have the same kind of ability to mine data that Sriram has with his platform, right? Because he is controlling the server and the client. Excuse me. So his ability to kind of analyze data is much deeper than ours is. But I still feel that, right now the challenge is to get people to listen to this in large numbers. So go where they're at. That's it's a different approach. I look at three things, right? So I mean, like, we look at, and I think we have two of them common with ours, right? Content, I think, is extremely central to the experience. We have to be. I also believe in PGC. I am not a huge believer in UGC. I think UGC is extremely challenging. The moderation problem in UGC is massive and cannot be understated. In podcasting, particularly, it's a bigger challenge because you have to listen to every minute of the content before you allow it to go onto your platform. So the moderation problem is a big one when it comes to UGC. But I think that, like, we basically operate at the intersection of content, of distribution, And so again, in distribution, I look at distribution as a more widely kind of broadly distributed content, right? Rather than just be on our own app. But I think that also becomes a fundamental piece.
Got it. Got it. And I think so. Okay. So before we come to the genres and what works on podcast, we had a few pre-questions before the podcast, before the webinar started, and I think one of them was that from a bunch of brand and agency people saying that what should be the money that needs to be paid for a podcast, like what should be the collaboration or the sponsored costs. What they researched online was saying that for about 1,000 listens or for about 1,000 streams, good podcast charge between $10 to $50.
That
So
seems.
I'll take this, Nishant. I come from advertising for 15 years. I've done that for a living. Media agencies, I've talked to some of them. That we do have very working relationship with media agencies. First thing I tell them is, this is not an impression buy. This is not a click-to rate. You are if you want to tell long story, you go make your 6-second ad, put it on YouTube. People skip that 6 second. That's a very different model because you're able to reach 100 million people there. 10% of them saw it, 1% of them clicked on it. For us, it's directly cutting to that 1% of that 100 million people who are willing to give you their time and attention, right? So when we work with Murthy here to create Ishq Bhi Risq Bhi, it is 100 minutes of story, right? Sandeep meets Priya and they fall in love and he wants to say yes to all her wishes all his life. So he starts investing in mutual fund. The brand is integral to the plot. You cannot split the brand and the podcast separately, right? The best example for this is Coke Studio. You cannot call it as either Coke or Studio. It is Coke Studio, right? So if you're looking at creating integrated experiences like that, native storytelling, that's the way to look at podcast. If you're looking for bidding it, today any ad network platform lets you interrupt your any content experience, right? You can interrupt an ad, you can video, you can interrupt a podcast, you can interrupt a news article. This is not that to begin with. So the dollar per stream is a out of context question, at least in the nascency that we are in this space, right? Second is almost all the ad insertion mechanism that we have globally, not one guy has relevant ad mechanism, right? I'm listening to a devotional song at 9 a.m. on one of the leading audio content platform. I get an ad for Budweiser. Not that I don't like Budweiser, not at 9 a.m. right? So it's completely out of context. I'm listening to some, soothing Tamil songs. I get some really, really loud Haryanvi song is now available. Like, are you even paying any attention? I'm listening to Tamil MP3, which is the lowest tempo rate, right? So it's completely out of context in audio advertisement right now. So the best way is what we are sticking to: solution selling, telling stories that fits the narrative of the brand, which overlaps the audience attention. So
If I could add to that, right? So I mean, like we do. So I think what Sriram is discussing is what we refer to as branded content, right? Where we work with the show, we work with the brand to create a show for them, right? So we work in that space, but we also do our own IPs, which we do take advertising on, right? I mean, like where we do straight ads as well. And I think the difference in terms of podcasting versus others, as Sriram was mentioning, there's no skipping. People don't skip these ads. They listen to these ads. People who download podcasts listen to podcasts. They don't so the leakage is very minimal. So that's why, because of that, the rate is higher. You said 10 to 50. That seems so. Basically, the way that we're selling in India right now is we are whenever we whenever we work with a brand, we quote a 3,000 rupee CPM rate, right? I mean, like, because we have kind of figured out a CPM rate that I think makes sense for us, and we look at it in the perspective of two things, right? So it is not a pure ad, because the difference in the podcast ad space is what we do is we do what's called a host read, right? So our host is basically the same way you have a radio jock mention, you have the same kind of thing over here, but it's not like a radio jock mention which is 10 seconds long. This is a good 40-second piece where the host is discussing the brand. So let me tell you a little bit about like what we did for Intel last year, right? So we worked with Intel on a product called Intel vPro. vPro is a certification project that they have around what is the around hardware and software, the combination of the two, making these computers ready for business. And it's a complicated product, right? It has it has pillars of what it is, right? It's security and it's a whole bunch of different things. We did a survey afterwards, right? And when we did that survey with our listeners, we got really, really great responses. Intel was super happy because what you get is you get complex messaging that penetrates to the listener. Listener understands what you're talking about, even though the messaging is complex, and that's something that they don't see in a lot of other in a lot of other forms of promotions that they do. So I think while branded content is also like a really big space for us, I think we make most of our money doing branded content more than the ad sale piece. Still, I think the ad sale piece is also very, very important, right? And I think that it's something that I don't want to. I want to make sure that we kind of try and push that part of the business as well.
MVS, what do you think? You've done clearly done branded content, but would you also look at then the ad piece of it in terms of promotions? Like, do I ever see also a love story when I'm hearing and I see an integration of your products there?
So, Nishant, the point is that the way we look at the medium, I think it gives me a great opportunity to tell my story, and my story is going to be a little longer than a television ad or a little longer than a GIF banner that you will go out and see. So, I don't want to interrupt your user experience when you're listening to something by using this medium to put up an ad, but I definitely want to create my story and attract listeners to that particular story. So, for example, there is this great story happening in our company about the China Plus One strategy, and easily it can become a 10-episode kind of a thing, because various industries will probably want to look for other alternatives than China to set shop, and then it gives rise to an entirely new set of content saying that how are states ready to provide this kind of an infrastructure? Are we ready to provide manpower? Are we ready to provide tech solutions? Are we ready to sort of cut on licenses? So you just see how the whole content is ballooning. Now, when I have so much of rich content to speak about, I would rather put up content which is originally created by me and go out and market it. And I'm lucky to be in a space where it's a knowledge kind of a business. Mutual fund industry is a knowledge business. Therefore, people want to listen to us. So that's the opportunity which it gives me. But yeah, maybe somebody else who's in a different kind of an industry would like to increase reach and therefore be present in content, which has got its own attractiveness.
Got it. Alok, coming to you, first question is how many platforms you're present on right now, and where do you see that growing? And secondly, some of our research says that it's going to be a $800 million business in 2020 globally. And if you can slightly estimate, what do you think India is going to be?
So the last bit, which is $800 million, if you pick up any of the US podcasting reports, it is already estimated to be, the advertising bit of podcast is already estimated to be close to 700 million. Yeah. So I think to add to that, it's going to be much bigger than 800 million.
Okay.
As far as platforms, where are we present? And I'll go back to what Amit was talking about. We are present everywhere where our audience is, because our approach is slightly, it's kind of a combination of what everyone's doing. Plus, on top of that, we want to have our own IP per se. So it's Straight Talk, which is a podcast by Mahindra Racing. So it's not in partnership with someone else or with any other platform which is creating branded content for us. It's completely in-house. It's done by our in-house and our agency teams. Because for us, we also are looking at creating interesting assets to engage our existing partners and sponsors. I mean, if you see sporting teams in general, each one of them would have multiple partners and sponsors, and there are multiple assets that sporting teams offer, right? Right from team jerseys to the race car to whatever you will, the billboards that you see across the track or a field. This becomes another digital asset for us to create. And we've managed to do this successfully with some of the other assets which have been on YouTube for the last 4 or 5 seasons, where we have a content creation partner, but we have some of our other sponsors and partners getting involved in it. So that's where I see podcasting go for us, wherein we will use it as a digital asset, where not just our fans, but also our other partners can use it as a platform to tell their stories. So what Murthy is doing with probably the team at Avaz is what I would anticipate that some of our partners or sponsors would want to do with us as a team.
Got it.
Where do I see it? I think the future would be where we get into more focused niches, if you will. So today it's a little more wider and broader. Maybe tomorrow we have something which just talks about automotive technology, because we know that is something which is there are a bunch of automotive and tech geeks who love to listen to that sort of content. So maybe we create a small niche which just focuses on that, something which just focuses on driving a race car and just go deeper into that. So that could be the future. And that's how we see it evolving. But again, as I said, not wanting to restrict it to platforms, but go everywhere where our audience is. And the reason why we made a big shift to YouTube is primarily that's where we have the biggest digital audience who's consuming content.
Got it. Because I think this is an interesting point, because what we also recently did, when we were talking to some of our entertainment and web series folks, comparing that, why not an Indian web series has kind of exploded at a global level, though the content is being so good. And I think one of the arguments there was that we're not able to build that fan following, that cult fan groups, which a Marvel might have or a Game of Thrones might have. So I think podcast could be that one medium where you can at least get those niches and those geeks in one place.
Definitely, because I think there are a lot of Indian origin people who are in the business of podcasting and the business of creating content. And again, I mean, if you keep it platform agnostic, there are so many of them. Everyone from YouTubers to someone like a Jay Shetty who have their own content series, right from podcasts to their own TV shows. So I think there's nothing stopping us from getting there.
Great.
Also, Nishant, this week, the first time a audio reporting won Pulitzer Prize, This American Life, right? So that's a podcast that won a Pulitzer Prize, and it's really, really pivotal moment for the audio reporting, audio storytelling, podcast, right? It's really exciting time if you look at it that way.
Interesting. So I'm going to quickly share my screen right now. Let me know if you guys can see the screen right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Right? So one of the questions which we got from our audience is, they wanted to understand more about languages and the genres of podcasts that work. Because we have, like YouTubers, now we have a budding group of people who want to start their own podcast and start doing their own content. So what we had was, if you can look at it, on YouTube, this is the analysis that we did. And these are the categories of content which we saw is kind of gaining viewership. Now, the problem with YouTube is, again, the categorization in certain topics might be relevant, might not be relevant, and it might not be that accurate. But just as a reference point, and if we can talk about it, and Amit, if you can pick up from it,
sure.
Is that right now we show that, stories and poetry is kind of tops the chart, followed by religious, motivational content. And then we go on to chat shows and topic-specific interviews and stuff like that.
Right.
Do you see the same trends across?
So I would say that for us, actually, we see it's interesting. I think we're seeing some upheaval in terms of what content consumption used to be. Our main, our most popular shows used to be conversational, topical, like, having conversations about different subjects with different people. But since we've gone under lockdown, we've seen some explosions happen in, like, the storytelling space. Those shows have really, really kind of grown very, very quickly, especially the last couple of months, right? I mean, like, so I think that's definitely that kind of plays out for sure. Motivational is always strong. Motivational, for whatever reason that might be, but in India, motivational content just works. We have a show called The Habit Coach, which has consistently one of our top 5 shows, like every month. I mean, like, since it's been going on for over a year, it's always been it's been in the top 5, like, from the second month onwards. So it is always one of the best shows that we have going. So yeah, I think this. I absolutely think that this definitely does play out. I think that YouTube works a little differently than audio apps do in terms of how people consume content. For example, on a lot of YouTube stuff, I will see, so basically names get numbers on YouTube, right? If you have a well-known comedian on some show, or if you have a well-known actor on some show, those shows get numbers on YouTube. But I think that when we look at our consumption behavior on our other distribution platforms, things are more habitual. So the shows that people listen to are the shows that they heard last week. and the week before and the week before. So I think that that's a little different over there because discovery is fundamentally different, right? On YouTube compared to other platforms, we make it available on YouTube because we want that ease of discovery. But if you want to consume a podcast on another platform, and YouTube's a very small part of our traffic, right? So I would say that that's actually more true behavior. But if you want to look at those kinds of platforms, then the steps which you get to subscribe to a podcast and listen to a podcast are different than what you would do on YouTube, because YouTube is, watch next, or like, whatever comes in front of your, like, recommended feed, or, it's mostly that kind of stuff.
Got it. Sreeraman, if you can take the language bit, what do you think about the languages? So right now we have, so our analysis on YouTube says that, viewership wise, let's say Hindi is number one, even engagement wise, but on uploads, English as a language kind of takes over right now in terms of number of videos being uploaded. And then regional comes third, but within regional, what we see is Bengali, followed by Tamil, and then Malayalam.
Yes. So this is a subset of the internet audience base as well, right? So for example, the language, Hindi as a language is spoken by some 500 million plus people in India. Yeah. So there was a reason why we started with Hindi. When Awaaz went live Jan 2019, we just had a modest 100 hours of Hindi programming when we went live, right? So there was a reason, because it is the largest spoken language, and there are so many different states, right? Almost pretty much whole of North India you can target with Hindi. And then, of course, English is the early adopters, right? So these are the people with an iPhone. These are the people who have heard about podcasts. These are the people who have a paying subscription to a Netflix kind of a thing. So they understand what is podcast. They're also the busy people who like to listen to it when they are doing something else, when they're commuting, when they're in a driving, when they are walking their dog, whatever it is, they still like to learn something new or stay productive. So that's why, the Jay Shetty that you mentioned, Alok, is a huge hit, because people who needs motivation, especially coming like the quality of Jay Shetty, right? So it's decision makers, CXOs, others who would like to listen to somebody like Jay Shetty and other motivational English podcasts, right? So Hindi is very different. The programming is, if I may say, it's more like a Star Plus, right? So there are GEC. There is some humor, show, drama, a lot of content. English is very different. Like Amit was saying, you can explain Intel there in a show and people will still listen to it, right? So the audience and genre kind of overlap onto each other from an inside point of view, right? English is very different. You can have very quirky, even from a non-fiction like humor and all. In the English, you can have a lot more quirkier. You can have some amount of non-brand safe words in it, or you can beep it out. It's still fine. Hindi has to be a lot cleaner and a lot family-centric, sanskari-ish. So that's my take on it. And I have my own one or two stats to share, but I will let you finish, and then if we have time, I will put up my screen.
Do we have MVS, or did we lose him?
No, he's there. He's just on mute.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
There he is.
No, I also switched off my video because I wanted the screen to be the focus and not us.
So MVS, for you, how important is regional, and how do you see this market growing? Because I'm sure your audiences are definitely consuming content in different languages.
See, the opportunity for us in India, and which is a fantastic one, is that we are almost 29 different countries. There are so many people, so many speaking so much of different dialects, and our kind of a product is something which everybody wants, particularly now that we have gone through this entire pandemic. And I know it sounds cliched, but people are very anxious of their future. They're worried about whether they're saving right. And a lot of the discretionary spends have come down. So they're looking at avenues to go out and invest. And that is a fabulous opportunity for us to go out and create content, which is not only English, but English plus about 8, 9, 10 languages for sure. As I told you earlier during our conversation, that we have espoused the journey of voice, video, and vernacular. We do a lot of it in terms of the video bit. In case of voice, we have added Hindi, but yeah, definitely we will look at opportunities in other markets. Particularly if you go down south, people are very, very keen to listen about financial markets in their local dialects, which is Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam, and Telugu. Bengali, again, is something that, and I think somewhere regional language also builds an element of trust, which is very critical for a financial services product. So there is a huge opportunity for it to explode. And I think if there are more marketeers who come on board, it will only become richer from a recipient's perspective.
Got it. So we kind of have a slide where we look at the Hindi content, which I think is pretty much similar because Hindi again is a big audience of the overall piece. So the categories as across uploads, engagement, and views look pretty much similar. This is where we again looked at stories and poetry as a specific genre, where again you see Hindi, English, followed by regional languages. So this is where I think the regional languages is a piece that is kind of taken off and overtaken Hindi and English.
So
And I think
Nishant, I just want to bring in a point. Okay, can you go to the earlier slide? So this thing of story and poetries, the fact that it is popular is going to be something which is very generic. If you connect back to all our films that we go out and watch, all the way we converse in stories, we converse in poetries. There is this white bearded gentleman who seems to be very, very popular, and he seems to be speaking about, I don't recall the name of this gentleman, but he wears a Chinese collared kurta, and he speaks about dosti and he speaks about stuff like that. So it will always touch a chord. If you look at Nilesh Mishra, one of the earliest pioneers of podcasting, he endeared so many people by speaking about smaller stories, and it also gives a great opportunity for people who like to create content. Look at the stand-up comedian. He doesn't. There is no nepotism for a stand-up comedian. He's completely, or she's completely driven or is propelled by her or his own performance. So if you have great content, you will have a huge swarm of listeners who will come to you, and story and poetry will always go out and rule the charts. Whereas when you look at motivational or spiritual, then you need to have some kind of a standing in that kind of a space. So maybe it's a great opportunity for people who are already renowned in that space to rehash and recycle content into a podcast form and increase longevity. I mean, I was just thinking before the beginning of the show, what if Mr. Bachchan started a podcast of all dialogues from his films which were never said and in his own baritone? And just look at the kind of audience that he will go out and sort of pull. It can be a point of inflection for the whole podcast industry. I mean, look at look at Sudesh Bhosle, who used to do a lot of voice for him. What if he goes out and does a whole show which talks about the same dialogues if different people would have gone out and spoken, how it would have changed. So this is the kind of ways in which the entire crucible can be sort of precipitated to create a richer broth.
got it. I think similar to that, like on I think Big FM or one of the stations, Anu Kapoor does a show of talking about all the old movies as well. So I think this is a question for Amit and Sreeraman. When are you going to get more celebrities on your platform?
When we see more money in the ecosystem, very honestly, I mean, like that's the honest answer. Celebrity content costs a lot of money compared to other forms, right? I mean, like we work with two, I guess you would call celebrities, if you will, right? So Cyrus Brocha does a show with us, which is a long-standing show, but that's because Cyrus is so gung-ho on podcasting as a thing. He sees it as a really big piece for him going forward. The other one is about a few months ago, we launched a show with Ashish Vidyarthi. And so again, but both of them are well-known personalities and well-known figures, but they're not what you would, I don't think they're Amitabh Bachchan or like, the celebrities that we're talking about like that, right? That kind of celebrity to get on board, it's going to be a little challenging, right? I think that, but I think what you will see is you will see a lot of other. So I was looking at like what kind of celebrities are doing podcasts in the U.S., right? And they're the equivalent of stand-up comedians, television presenters. There are a lot of producers and directors doing stuff like that. Like one of the most popular ones is a show by this guy named Kevin Smith called The Modcast. Then the guy who the producer of Billions does a podcast. Sorry, I can't remember the name of his podcast, but he does a podcast as well. So there are a lot of different producers, directors who are doing stuff. So I think what you're going to wind up is, because that still kind of scratches the itch for the celebrity story, but it's not straight celeb content. I think we'll also start seeing some celebrity work happen in storytelling spaces, because that's relatively, when you do long form conversational stuff, the amount of investment from a time perspective is high for the talent. If you're doing storytelling, you're doing a 12-minute story, I basically need 2.5 hours with the actor to get something ready, done in that much time, right? And so that seems like a more kind of, that seems to be something which is probably more likely to occur in the shorter time than getting celebs to do like these longer shows.
Got it. Alok, coming to you. this is one particular slide where we talk about topic specific podcasts, and these are the topics that are popular. Now, I don't know why, but music seems to be a lot more popular in terms of getting viewership, where I think it includes all your music artists and content around music. What do you think is missing right now, and where do you see this growing? Because something like a business and finance, would you expect more marketing people to come and do more podcasts? Because I think on YouTube, we've pretty much catered a lot of these people who can come and speak. But on the podcast category, what do you see is missing right now?
I think to answer the part of will more marketing people come onto podcast, I think the starting point really is if you ask the larger agency ecosystem, I don't think when the agency thinks of selling media, podcast is up there in their priority list. Yeah, I think so. The starting point for, in general, the marketing folk is that there needs to be more education about the opportunities around podcasting, the opportunities, some of these things, that Shri and Amit have been talking about, and MVS spoke about what they are doing. I think it's a lot of these things are very enlightening for me as well in terms of what's happening in the space. I think this needs to happen as an industry. Everyone needs to come together, work with the agencies to first start educating the marketeers around what really are the opportunities, and that really will be the starting point. I think in terms of categories and genres, I think this is content consumption, right? And podcast being played mostly on your mobile devices, which today is the most intimate device that everyone carries around. I think it's so much more easier to consume that content. But as I said, we need to start with educating people. And the other bit is, which I, again, personally feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, and is how are we really able to measure? And I think what MVS has been talking about is a great case study to talk about. How are we really able to measure the impact? The Intel example that Amit spoke of, and where you guys went back and did a survey and saw that the results were very encouraging. I think there has to be some education again about measurement as well. So one of the fundamental reasons, so two reasons rather, where I moved from pure audio to YouTube is A, of course, the larger audience. B, again, is measurement. I know that, out of 150,000 streams, there are 30,000 people who are listening to the entire 47-minute. And you guys know YouTube analytics. I think it gives you such in-depth information, and the way the advertising ecosystem around YouTube really is built helps you do like a full funnel exercise, the whole, walk the whole mile, right from putting the content out to measuring and to seeing what the impact really is. So I think that's what needs to start happening. I feel from a technology perspective also, platforms need to get better and smarter, pure audio platforms. And second bit, as I said, is education. I mean, go out with the agencies and tell brands what's possible.
Yeah, I think Google recently, I think yesterday or last week itself, launched a podcast manager tool where they're starting to give some analytics. But Amit, to you as well as to Sreeraman, for all the branded collaborations that you do, are you able to give them analytics in terms of their audiences, the demography, retention, and stuff like that?
So not demographics. Demographics get a little, what we do from a demographic. So one of the challenges with podcasting, the way we approach it as opposed to the way Sriram does it, right? And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the differences is that we distribute via RSS to all these various platforms, right? So there is a disconnect between our server and the time when the content is being consumed at the client end. So since there's no connection over there, we don't have deep demographic data around that stuff, right? So that is one of the challenges. But having said that, the general kind of when we do these surveys, go back and kind of look at them, right? The numbers are very we do have a great deal of data available, right? But there is some, so you have to kind of present the data with two things. One is the objective data that you have, and the second is the subjective analysis that you put on top of it, which comes from more survey oriented stuff. For example, we do a yearly survey of our audience, right? Probably a little more than a yearly, but we do a fairly large survey of the audience, right? So about 1,000, 1,200 people kind of participate in the survey, and we get an idea of what is the male female distribution, what are the income levels, what are the kinds of cities that they occur, that they live in. So we have this kind of data, so we apply this to the overall kind of this. Because again, I think that that is the value that is visible right now. Because if you were to try and slice it narrowly on each piece, that data is simply not available. And to make that available, I have to make it so that you can only listen to my content on my app. And I don't know that that is the way that we want to kind of go with that.
Go right now. Sreeraman, what about you? Because you have a lot of, I think, audiences on your platform.
Yeah.
What kind of data are you able to mine? And also, does it resonate with what we are showcasing right now? The 25 to 30.
It does. Nishant, if you let me share my screen, I can show you one or two things, right? Yeah. Okay. There you go. So this is just one piece of data. I know it looks like noodles and pasta mixed, but this is just, it's coded for a reason, right? You can see city-wise what genre is, right? You can see how different cities vary, and things like that, right? So we know it to the last little city that people listen to. Somehow Kathmandu has come in the top now. It has come in the top 5, top 6 now, right? So I don't know what
are
people
the numbers on the top?
Sorry, numbers are the show code. Which show is what, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's kept this way so that even if it is shared, somebody has it but has no clue, right? So each orange is for a particular genre, the blue is for a particular genre, so on, right? So this is one. Now, if you look at generally, if you look at my general stats, right? So I can tell you the demographics, I can tell you the city, I can tell you their audience interest and affinity, right? So how much percentage of my audience are tech savvy? Look, it's right on the top. How many percentage of my audience are media and entertainment enthusiasts? So you get the long tail of their interest, their affinity, their listening habits, and about 60% of our audience are aged between 18 to 34, right? So this is across cities. I can do further. I can split this into, okay, tell me the listenership age in Kanpur, I can give you that. Tell me how Bombay audience are different from Delhi, I can give you that, right? So when a brand comes to us and says, my audience are in urban, of course, I can send a notification only to the urban audience. I can make the content be available only to them. Or when we do HB and it has to be reaching every indie speaker out there, then we know how to expose this content to them, make it discoverable for our audience and get the listenership, right? And just 5 more seconds.
I'm actually interested to know what's the purple show, which is the most popular in New Delhi and Biratnagar.
It has to be humor or stories. So humor stories are on the top 2. It's permanently there. Yeah, I had a question for Alok, if I may ask. Alok,
yes, please.
Do you see like really sports enthusiasts who coming there, or is it racing enthusiasts, or is generally people who are auto aficionados? What kind of audience do you appeal to in general?
So, of course, this motorsport and the automotive enthusiasts are the core, but the next set of audiences that we sort of appeal to is technology enthusiasts. Technology enthusiasts are a very, very big category. The fourth category, interestingly, is music.
Okay.
So these are sort of, these kind of end up being great extensions. And we've seen that, and that's how we've also tailored our content. And, you know, just to give you an example, when we recently did a collab with an Indian rapper, our YouTube subscriber base doubled just during that one campaign. So similarly, we've seen tremendous amount of completion rates on tech-focused content. So we know that our audience is, and that there's a lot of work that we've done with the likes of Google and Facebook, wherein we have a lot more rich insights in terms of who our audience is. But automotive, motorsport being the core, tech and music is the extension.
Interesting overlap there, music and tech.
Nishant, I just want to add a point to what Sreeraman was saying when he showed us those digital bricks which were there. So you look at the content that we have gone and created, okay? There are 100,000 users who have heard that content. On average, they listen to the show for about 3.5 episodes, which means 30 minutes multiplied by 60 seconds. Look at the amount of time I have got of these audiences for perhaps a marginal amount of money that I would have gone and spent. And even there, I would not have known who has heard, who has not heard. So clearly, it is giving a marketeer like me a great opportunity to connect and to retain the attention of my audience for a much, much longer time.
Yeah.
And that is where, podcast is changing completely. And I think from the perspective of, allowing me to own that space, it is much, much more optimal to own the space this way rather than try and find a foot in between, advertisers from different genres, in then trying to second guess what kind of music does my audience like, and then trying to squeeze in a ad spot there.
So, can I add to that a little bit? I had a really interesting experience about last year when I went for this podcast movement content conference. So I'm sure most people who are listening to this know who Guy Raz is, the host of Wow in the World and How I Built This. And at that conference, he said something which I thought was really cool. He said, I'd rather have 5,000 podcast listeners than 100,000 Twitter followers. And I thought that was a really, really interesting thing. And then a couple of days later, there's a guy named Simon Owens wrote an article which kind of really laid out why that was the case from a mathematical perspective. And you literally get 1,200 times the amount of engagement from 5,000 podcast listeners as you get from 100,000 Twitter followers. And I think that 1,200 times, 1,200 times, that's insane. And I think that is one of the key things that is the most exciting thing about the space for brands as we work with them, right? That they're getting such deep engagement with the people who are listening to this stuff, even if whether it is the branded content, which is the longer pieces, or whether it is the 45-second to 1 minute piece that we're putting in from a promotional perspective, right? We did a campaign for HDFC Life last in February, and when we went out and we did our post activity survey. That time they had like 90% plus recall on the campaign. So, I mean, like, again, they were thrilled with it as well, right? So I think that just the attention that you get from as a brand from this stuff is just great.
Okay. Just Nishant, to add to Amit what he's saying is that the medium itself gives you so much more authenticity to the brand. Imagine a CEO coming and talking about how he's working on gender diversity in the company. Imagine the CMO of an FMCG company who has launched something to wash vegetables coming and talking about how they went out and built that particular product. Imagine, an analytics guy coming and telling you how he went out and made the quant fund. It will lend so much more authenticity to those products and to those services which will be created over an ad. And I think it is something that is a must-have in the digital in the digital mix that you will want to go out and do as a brand. And it might end up replacing some of the other stuff that you go and do. I mean, I'm just second guessing, but maybe display ads will be something that I would want to replace with something like this, and clearly create content which is coming from our company rather than trying to curate it or look for it elsewhere.
Got it. Interesting, guys. I think we're out of time, so we're going to take some questions. But before that, Sreeraman, I'll end this podcast by asking one question to you. What our analysis on YouTube has also shown, and whether you agree with us or not, is that the best time to upload a podcast is on a Friday or on a Saturday, and that too in the second half of the evening is when we see the maximum amount of traction, 6 p.m. afterwards. So do you see that trend going on your platform?
Not at all. At least before the lockdown, it used to be a lot of consumption morning, like 7 to 9 or 7 to 10, and then evening again 5 to 8. Now it has evened out pretty much. There is consumption happening through the day. So it might be very different from the data sets that you have seen so far, or maybe things have changed in the bit. But I can only speak from the data I have, and it's kind of even pretty much through the day.
So mine is actually the
huge chunk of our analysis also kind of gets tweaked because there's a lot of Love Guru content out there, which is still being consumed on digital in the night. So I think that also kind of
so we actually see the opposite, right? I mean, like, we see huge drops on Saturday and Sunday, like huge drops, 40, 45. So I mean, like, now in lockdown it's gone less, it's become 20% or so, but before that was 40, 50% drops in traffic on Saturday and Sunday.
Does it tell something about the behavior? Like, people prefer to listen more when they're traveling?
Commute workout chores.
It does, yes.
Commute workout chores, man. That's the mantra. Or at least pre-lockdown, that was the mantra. Now there's no commute, there's no workout, so it's only chores, more chores. That's it.
Great. So guys, we'll start off with the Q&A. Let's see what other questions have. One question we have from Harsh Doshi, which says, can you give me some tips regarding marketing of a podcast and how can the current podcast apps play a role in it? Typically for someone who's creating podcasts as an individual, how does any tips regarding how does he market?
If it's an
Go ahead, please.
No, if it's an independent podcast, I would side with everything that Amit does. Make it available everywhere. If you are somebody like us, then that's a lot of different strategies to do it. One is brand building campaigns. Like if, I don't know if anybody noticed my previous slide. Uh, we were if you see the 4 boundary walls behind, that's ours, right? It's on an international match called as the pink ball test. So it marketing a podcast is very hard thing if you are going to drive attention or listenership to your platform. But if you're an independent creator, go for make it ubiquitously available on all platforms and then use your power in social media to get listenership there.
And on the same lines, I think the next question says that I would like to ask something. For example, I do my podcast on few applications like Castbox and Podbean's platform. All of these applications are based on blockchain technology.
Castbox, really?
Question,
No, they have a
They have the little
blockchain-based reward
coin.
mechanism.
Yeah, they have the coining thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Does Podbean have the same thing? I didn't know Podbean had that.
They have a reward. Okay, you need something to show to your investors that you are more than a media playing app. So blockchain and AI, just add it anywhere you want. Okay. So it'll sound interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand the question over there.
okay.
I don't think there is a question over there.
Then not a question, I think there. The other question is, how does the creator gets benefit? How does the creator get paid doing a podcast? So does all the other, like other independent platforms who have a rev share like we have with YouTube? Or how does the creator get paid?
So that's what we do. We do rev share with our creators. We work with creators on rev share. But I mean, like, if you're looking to do this to get paid, then I mean, like, this is not the time yet. It's not like, it's not. I mean, like, it's not 100% there where, like, we sell, like, last year, I think we sold like 14% of our inventory total, right? Of what could be sold. Because podcasting is still a very, very nascent space. The branded podcast piece, I mean, like, that is something which you're going to have to go and sell. So I don't know that individual podcasters can do that. They have to work with some sort of network which is going to do some sort of brand, wide ranging brand sales for them. But it's I mean, like, money is tough in this space right now. I mean, like, it's getting better, but it's tough. And I mean, like, it was getting better before we had a pandemic, and now we'll see what happens.
So that's the other question where people want you to compare it to the other OTT platforms. Everyone's been posting a rise. Do you see similar exponential growth in terms of content consumption or not much?
So I saw initially very even numbers, right? When the pandemic first started, we saw very, very even numbers. But over time, it has started to grow quite a bit. I think what had happened was, it's my hypothesis that basically people listen to podcasts based on habits. And I think what Sriram was mentioning about Hindi versus English listening is true in that case, right? In English, I think habit formation becomes a big part of how you listen to podcasts. And I think that the habits of commute and workout disappeared, right? Basically, no gyms, no commutes. So at that point, you needed to find different things to substitute your listening time for. And I think that's happened now, but it took a little while for it to get over there. And I think that's a big reason why we're not seeing, like, as Sriram mentioned, same thing with our thing, where we used to have like 7 to 9, and then we used to have 5 to 7. Like, that was the time when people were, but now it's spread throughout the day. The other thing is the drop from like 40-50% is now down to 20% on weekends, right? Because again, there is continuous consumption over there. People found the times that they needed to kind of listen to. And I think that's what is the difference. Now, I hope that these new times stick after pandemic so that we can see like a big boom happen then. But
very well might, Amit, because we've seen 22% increase in listenership and nearly 25% in the time spent as well, right? So now we squarely feel it's our job that we have, audience have come to us. Now it's squarely our responsibility to keep them. So we are doubling down on production.
Makes sense.
Next question we have from Sadhvi, who says, branded content podcasts, a way to sustain or coexist with the brands? Question mark.
Oh, difficult question to answer because we love the brands. They're our best friends. I mean, like, I really, really love them so much that it's a difficult question to answer. So I'll tell you what the challenge becomes, right? The thing with the branded podcast, again, in my context, not in Sriram's context, right? They are slightly different this. But from our context, the challenge with the branded content, a branded podcast is we have to build audience for each show individually, right? And that is a challenge. And what often happens is we have brands come to us, say that we want to produce a pro show, but they're only willing to put in production money, they're not willing to put in marketing money. And you have to market this podcast if you're going to create an independent podcast every time, right? So brands are awesome, we love them, they're our best friends, but we sometimes do need to tell them that, hey, you know what, this might or might not be the direction to go in.
And a
Yeah,
lot.
adding to that, branded shows, if done tastefully, right, it's as good as a non-branded show. So
Mhm.
just
Yep.
that,
Agree.
just like how in print brand managers ask for logo bada karo, either don't ask for jingle bada karo, right? It's don't not disrupt the purity and the sanctity of the show. Then whether there is a brand or no brand, it's kind of the same.
Yep.
Uh, and the question kind of continues saying, and I think this is a question which has come out a lot of times. That's for independent creators to monetize. How much should they wait, or how much is the amount of content they need to put out there, or if they have an idea, they should come and pitch to you guys.
Yeah, you can pitch to me,
Pitch
Sreeraman
to
at
us.
awas.com.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pitch to us too, we're happy to listen. But I'm sorry, what was the question?
How much time does it take for independent creators to monetize? Is there like a certain amount of content you need to put out there, certain amount of time you need to?
I don't have a single answer for that because it really depends on how successful the show gets, how quickly the show gets any kind of traction, right? Shows that do well, you start monetizing quicker than shows that are not doing well. Because they're from our end, there's a certain amount of effort involved in deploying a campaign, right? And if your show is doing 5,000 downloads a month, then I don't know if the effort is something that we're really going to spend that much time on doing, right? I mean, like, at the same time, if your show is doing 50,000 downloads a month, then we'll spend the time on deploying into your show. So it really depends on traction when you're talking about like ad sales against content in that sense. But I think the most important thing for people is regularity. That's the one thing that we see as the single most important function, or the single most important factor which dictates a show's success. A show which comes out irregularly, a show which will do 3 episodes in a week and then not come out for 3 weeks after that, a show which will do like, once every month, these shows don't work as well as shows that come out every week on the time expected, no matter what, right? If your show is expected to be there at 9 a.m. on Mondays, I should be able to find it at 9 a.m. on Mondays, right? And I think that is the number one thing that we see as like kind of having a correlation to success for a show.
Hey, I'm asking this question on behalf of the audience because you can keep talking about making podcasts. You can call me or Amit all the time, but we have two paying brands here on the show, right? And nobody's asking them what does a brand manager look when they pay $1 to any podcaster. So
Thank you.
Alok or MVS, please go for it. Both, in fact, the same question. What do you look for when you sponsor anything?
So in fact, and it's linked to the last question that one of the audience members asked, which is, when are you in a position to start monetizing? And I will link it back to what Amit mentioned, where 5,000 podcast listeners are probably better than 100,000 followers on Twitter. I think if your audience is right, if your audience is in a sharp enough niche where the brand is interested in, I think then it's not a numbers game. Yeah. If you are in a B2B space where the ticket size is large. So if you tell me that you've got 5,000 CXOs listening to your podcast each week, each month, whatever, as opposed to, 50,000 general 20 to 30-year-olds, the audience, the 5,000 CXO audience is far more important to a brand which is trying to reach out to CXOs. So it's not a numbers game. When can you start monetizing? It's not dependent on the size of an audience, especially as far as podcasting is concerned. That's where it is different from a platform like YouTube, where it's you want to look at big numbers and millions of views. So I would look at the audience fit. That really is the first thing, and then of course the numbers. What is the size of your audience?
MBS, also for you, would you be willing to look at certain numbers in terms of metrics and spend in advertising, or right now, organic is the way to go for you?
So, Nishant, for me, I think organic is working well, and I'll tell you why. It's not just about the content; it's also about the way it gets distributed. Okay, if you look, and I'm saying particularly if you stay on the business that I am in, the mutual fund space, the content which I create organically gets distributed across my channel partners, which is banks, which is the independent financial advisors, as they are called as IFAs, which is the national level distributors. They in turn take it to investors, so it's a B2B2C kind of a model. Our own portfolio of customers, so it becomes a B2C kind of a model. It can also be, audiences who are not a part of our portfolio, but we are attracting them through these kind of shows. So it gives me a great opportunity to take very, very rich content and pass it on through channels which are already organically embedded with us. I mean, at this point in time, if you ask me, would you want to go out and, brand some content that somebody else is doing? I'm not too sure about it, because again, it boils down to the business that I am in. But perhaps if I was a hand sanitizer brand, I would have perhaps gone out and done it with somebody who's got a great show on cooking or something of that sort. But in this case particularly, I want to sort of play straight on the wicket, and in fact curate more and more content. We have just launched our second. So Ishmi Risk B season 2 is live now, and we have launched one more podcast, Mind Over Markets, which is a Q&A kind of a thing between me and our CIO. Sorry, our CIO and me. I mean, just being grammatically correct, our CIO and me. And it has already had quite a few audience. And what is happening is that all of these gives us opportunity to keep adding and speaking about stuff that we would have missed in our interaction. So for example, we have almost every day, we have conversations which are happening with the channel partners. Now, there are a host of questions which come in those kind of interactions, a webinar or a Zoom call. All of it can become content again for another podcast which we can go out and launch, because this is the pulse of the market. 80% of the business is done by these channel partners across the country. And when they are asking you a question, they are representing the hopes, the aspirations, the fears of millions of people in this country. So you just see how everything is sort of telescoping into each other.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to club the last two questions saying quizzes have been great on TV. Any examples of audio quizzes? And is Bollywood the only voice to share in India? Why isn't there diversification beyond cricket and Bollywood? Which I feel there is now, I think, in terms of the content that's out there, right?
I think there is. I mean, like, we don't do much in Bollywood and we don't do much in cricket, mainly because we can't afford it. I would love to do more Bollywood and cricket than we could. But I mean, like, very honestly, ABCD is a real thing. Astrology, Bollywood, cricket, devotional, right? This is a real thing in India. And this stuff works much, much better than other things. But it's just, yeah, man. I mean, like, if I want to do Bollywood content to get somebody really interesting, it's, kind of, I mean, like, to get a good person to do the Bollywood we produce No Filter Neha for JioSaavn, right? So JioSaavn put out the show No Filter Neha. I have an idea of what kind of budgets went into that show. Unless Alok, MVS, you'd like to participate, I don't see how we can afford doing something like that, right? It's just it's a different kind of the financial in that is different. When we were looking at doing cricket, we did a show we did a show called Cricket Wala Chronicles with Ayaz Memon a couple of years ago, and we wanted to continue doing it. But Ayaz is fantastic, but I mean, like, there's a cost involved, and then we wanted to do stuff where we're getting former cricketers involved, and the cost involved at that point in time, like, multiplied so dramatically, it's not even funny. I'll give you like when I started the business, like 2015 times, right? That time, what did I had a few people I wanted to kind of do stuff with, and I had some ideas in my head. I want to do funny stuff. I want to do sports stuff, right? Because sports talk radio is a big thing. I approached a former Indian cricketer, not a very well-known one, not a very, not someone like who everybody would know the name of, former Indian cricketer. He asked me for 3 lakh rupees an episode. 3 lakh rupees an episode. I mean, like, that was the number that was put out to me, right? For an audio show. And so, I mean, like, it's just, without like serious money available, that's just very difficult to kind of get to.
Also, Amit, sorry there. Bollywood and celebrities work well on visual because they are
visual
people, right? We have had shows in Bollywood Voices. We have had Sandeep Patil, cricketer. We have had many of these Bollywood celebrities interviews and reviews, and we even have social media videos saying "Mere baare mein sunne ke liye awaaz." Like, we have top celebrities endorsing to listen to me, go to ours and stuff like that. They are in the tinsel town and glam town and whatnot. Right. It's that, that when you see a Sanjay Leela Bansali movie, that's what the production value of that video is rich. Podcast is recorded when they're wearing a pajama. Their voice alone does not sell, right? So, for example, we have a show called Swami and His Friends, the classic Swami Friends, right? So it's done by RJ, a very like RJ Richa. I don't know how many people know RJ Richa, right? But it's one of the top performing show because the story is so nice. The artist reading it out is so nice. The sound effects are not jarring. It's very, very mildly put, right? Or if you look at Manto Ki Kahaniya, Munshi Premchand. So these are all Hindi, right? In English, we have subject expert. Like we have a CEO talking about blockchain. He was a CEO of a crypto wallet, right? He's talking about blockchain and cryptocurrency. He's the expert in that subject, hence people listen to it, right? So we have a MD of a large agency talking about brand management. People listen to it because she's an expert on that subject. So if you're a content creator looking at how can I afford a Bollywood or a cricketer, don't. It's not video, audio. People tune in because they see the substance, not the makeup and the glamour on it.
I would agree with that.
Got it. And the last question that we have is, what should be the ideal length of a podcast?
Context again. Yeah.
There isn't one.
But can you give them some reference that
I can give you, Nishant. So we call it as adequate and accurate. Take a subject and cover it accurately to begin with, right? So that means get an expert or somebody who's competent to do it. Adequate is it could be 20 seconds, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 hour long. Cover the subject adequately so that people are not left high and dry. So we have the Sunil Pal jokes, which is 19 seconds. We have conversational masterclass, which is upskilling. That's like 1 hour episode each, right? So 1 hour in length. So both works. Context drives the length.
I agree. I mean, like our formulation is similar, but so what we say is as long as it needs to be no more, no less.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, so and again, we have the same kind of thing, right? We've had shows which are like, 3 minutes long. We don't do 20 seconds, which is a good idea. I should start looking at those. But we have shows which are like 3-4 minutes long, and we have shows which are like up to 2 hours long. And like I mentioned, length is not a determinant of success. The determinant of success for me is regularity. That is the thing that I see drive success more than anything else. If I as an audience member can depend that the show that I want to listen to is going to be available at a time that I assume it's going to be available at, that is the thing that I see as having the biggest relationship with success of a podcast.
And one request to every podcaster out there, putting a mic on dining table and ruminating or rambling or ranting does not make it as a podcast. Please don't. Add some value to the listeners.
Anybody who says that all you need to make a podcast is a mic is a fool. Okay.
Please don't.
Please don't. To plan it. I mean, like, I'm not saying that you have to have like crazy equipment or anything like that, but plan
the
it.
Content
spend some time.
Useful. Yeah.
Spend some time on it. Just don't, me and my friends are having great stoner conversations. Let's turn that into a podcast. No, don't do that.
Even if you do that, don't post it online.
Somebody asked about a quiz show. An answer. Wait, don't tell me. Check that out. It's a really good quiz show. It's done by Stephen Dubner, the guy who does Freakonomics podcast. Sorry.
They are legends. Yeah.
Great, guys. I think it's a good point to call it today. We're already 20 minutes ahead, but thank you so much, everyone, for taking out the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all our
very insightful. I learned a lot. In fact, thanks Alok. Thanks Amit.
No, same here.
No, it was great. This was great. This was great. Thanks everybody.
Nishant, well researched. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.